the majority of people are not able to retire comfortably at 65, even with Social Security. And the question is, what do you do if you're the 99.99% of America that doesn't have that kind of money?
Changing jobs is one of the best ways to get a pay raise. So how do we balance making more money and giving the appearance of somebody who just doesn't stick around?
So the research shows that people who switch jobs every years, over the long term, tend to make more money. Anyone who tells you to follow your passion is already rich. And the person telling you to follow your passion made his billions in iron ore smelting. I think the key to professional and personal success is
when I was prepping the show, I thought, okay, I'm going to make a big list of sound bites and wind them up and let them go. But I didn't make the list. I don't think, I don't think it's what the people want. I don't think we would need it. I've got some great notes from the book. But you're like a 9th degree black belt at creating sound bites and memorable stuff that has actual impact. So
I don't know about that. But
I don't know, man. Like you see it on social media, right? And I hope one day I have any single talent that's as good as your ability to digest data and then relay that to an audience in a way that they find relatable and impactful. I think it's quite something, and I think it's done well for you. But I think it's not like those hypey reels on Instagram. Like it's actually valuable information. So that's, I think,
I appreciate that.
A unique confluence of talent and hard work. Whatever. Why am I fluffing you like this? Guys, the rest of this episode is me fawning over Scott Galloway, so either bail or turn up the volume and settle in. I was reading this article that I think probably is right up your alley. Something about boomers bequeathing money to millennials and Gen Z, I suppose, as well. $18 trillion worth of wealth. And I was sort of surprised, but I guess I shouldn't have been. Many people will get zero, or they will actually have to support their boomer parents on their, salary that they have at whatever job they have. So this seems like the widening wealth gap on steroids, because a lot of people who were maybe raised with good financial habits are going to inherit like $10 or $20 million from their parents who had those habits. And people who were raised without those habits and are learning them from your book, The Algebra of Wealth, or other books, or from no one, they're going to inherit a $100,000 double mortgage in a house that needs to be fixed up, and medical debt, and, the care expenses for their parents.
Yeah. So first of all, it's great to be with you, Jordan. I feel as if there's a lot there, but I feel as if whenever I see one of these articles, it's basically Latin for "Shut up, millennials! You're about to get rich. Stop bitching. You're about to get bank."
Right.
And
unless you're not.
Yeah, and what you're exactly right. It also goes to something that's unfortunate in America, and that is America used to be about a large inheritance tax. We had a progressive tax structure. We didn't mind billionaires, but we weren't trying to turn everyone into a billionaire. We were trying to turn everyone into a millionaire. And what you've seen over the last, no demographic group has grown faster in the last 10 years than billionaires. There used to be 500 in the US, now there's 2,500. And so that number of 18 trillion, you think, wow, that's great. We don't need to worry about young people. Well, you're exactly right. There's a small number of people who are creating so much wealth that it's dynastic. It's turning into Europe, where there's a small number of people that just have a crazy amount of money that they pass on to their kids. And things ranging from capital gains tax treatment that is taxed at a lower rate than current income, to an increase in the amount of money you can put into a trust. So you can put up to now, I think it's 26 or 23 or $26 million if you're a married couple into a trust that passes on to your kids tax-free. And that's what you can put in. And if it continues to grow, you're going to have a lot of kids with $50, $100, $200 million across America in terms of a trust, or the next generation.
Wow.
Now, whether you think that's good or bad, that's a different conversation. But the notion somehow that the next generation is fine because of this massive transfer of wealth, this massive transfer of wealth is incredibly lumpy. And you also have what's actually more staggering is 50% of baby boomers don't make more than $30,000 a year and have very scant resources to depend upon. And the fact that they're living so incredibly long, and quite frankly, their lifespan has increased much faster than their health span, or quote unquote their work span. We keep talking about how older people will become more productive. No, they've just become more expensive. And whereas about a couple decades ago, 20 to 25% of the nation's government spending went to people over the age of 65, it's now 40%. Within 10 to 20 years, it's going to be more than half.
Oof.
And unfortunately, our seniors, it's a social good to make sure they're not living in poverty, but it's not an investment in the sense that it doesn't pay off the same way that investments in infrastructure or space exploration or science or R&D or investing in education. So when senior investment, or for that matter, government spending goes beyond a certain percentage of the GDP, your growth lowers and we become a less prosperous nation. And I'm convinced of being an ageist, and I am an ageist. And also, I think biology is ageist. And economics, unfortunately, have proven that seniors in the United States continue to vote themselves more and more money. And it's coming at the expense of an increasingly smaller, younger population that is now supporting more and more seniors. And I'm very transparent about my situation. I am blessed. I got lucky early. I'm also very good at what I do. I'm not a total, not a lot of modesty here, but I also am smart enough to recognize how lucky I got.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad just turned 94. He's suffering. They don't even like to say the word dementia, but the bottom line is at 94, most people have some form of dementia, and he can't take care of himself. And he's in an assisted living facility in San Diego, and it's nice. It's not luxe, but it's nice. I have this wonderful woman who hangs out with him all day, call him his health aide. And then he's been falling lately at night, so I have to have full-time care at night. I'm spending $280,000 a year on my father's care. And the question is, what do you do if you're the 99.99% of America that doesn't have that kind of money? And the answer is you have to move in. Mom and dad move in with you, and the majority of the responsibilities fall to usually the mom in the household who's now taking care of kids and aging parents. It's incredibly taxing on that family, the kind of sandwich generation. And we have less and less investment to put into young people such that they can make enough money to even afford this. So the question is, what do we do? I think we need to start looking at more non-conventional means of forcing people to save such that when they turn 65, they have some money. I'm a fan of the idea of you give every baby $7,000 when they're born. You infantilize them. You don't let them touch it. They get it when they're 65. They should have about $1 million by the time they're 65. And then we get rid of Social Security. And I think getting rid of Social Security would be good for the deficit, bring down interest rates. But we have this issue we don't want to talk about, and that is we have a population of seniors who all vote and keep voting themselves more money, a demographic issue around fewer and fewer young people supporting more and more older people, and an aging population that a small number of them are exceptionally wealthy. Most of them are not. And this creates a society that is going to really struggle. It's going to be an increasingly big issue, but it's a boring and depressing issue to discuss.
Yeah, it scares me. I have aging parents. I moved them across the street from me. And when I tell my friends this, they go, let me get this straight. You got a house in the Bay Area, and then you just got another house in the Bay Area on your own street for your parents? And I was like, oh, yeah, not maybe an option for everybody. And they come over every day because they're 30-second walk, depending on how long it takes my dad to get his shoes on. But it's easy for us to go over there and check on them. We have our speaking of privilege, nanny go over there and make sure they're okay on days where we're not around all the time. They come over in the morning, they come over in the evening. I don't know how I would do this if, they moved from Michigan. What if I were a teacher in California? What would I do? How would I take care of them? The answer is I have absolutely no idea how I would do that. I would not be able to. I would just be shit out of luck, man. And that is not, like you said, 99.9% of people are just going to have to figure that out somehow by moving taking time off work, emptying their childhood home, sending everything, getting rid of, donating stuff, and then bringing their parents back to their house that's maybe already too small, and then taking care of them, and then getting up and going to work. It's just like, I don't understand how this is sustainable at all.
Yeah, I don't think it is. And I don't have a silver bullet answer other than trying to figure out forced saving mechanisms where people have some money as they get older. It's a tough one.
Yeah. 25% of Gen Z, this is from your book, The Algebra of Wealth, 25% of Gen Z thinks they'll never retire. Is that fear, or is that a realistic proposition that they will never retire, or they'll retire when they're, 75? What does never mean, I guess, is what I'm asking you.
I think it's both. I think that young people, generally speaking, enjoy their work. But keep in mind, physical labor until about 40, 50 years ago was mostly men working and mostly more physical. And a lot of it was backbreaking work. So by the time you got to 60 or 65, you're like, physically, I need to rest. I'm injured. I'm tired. I can't continue to deliver refrigerators, or working on the plant floor has been really difficult on my joints. Now I think most people see themselves as aspiring to a career that they'll want to keep productive. They'll want to continue working, whether that's the truth or not. But also, the majority of people are not able to retire comfortably at 65. Even with Social Security, they don't have the money.
Speaking of building wealth, let's take a quick break to talk about something that's good to do early and often, and that is investing. And here's the thing. Investing can seem a little intimidating. I remember back in the day, I thought you needed to have thousands of dollars sitting around. You had to be some kind of Wall Street genius to even start. You actually don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns, and Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. The cool thing is, Acorns does all the hard work for you. They set you up with a portfolio that's tailored to your goals and risk levels, so you don't have to stress about what to invest in. It is a smart, hands-off way to give your money a chance to grow. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. So it's true what they say, from little acorns, mighty oaks grow. Start small, get your foot in the door, and let those little efforts today turn into something significant for tomorrow. Head on over to acorns.com/Jordan or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Thanks to Acorns for sponsoring this episode of the show. Acorns Advisors, LLC is an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures over at acorns.com/Jordan. All right, now back to Scott Galloway.
The greatest bump in mortality for men is one, when their spouse dies, and two, when they stop working. Because men typically women are much better at creating a diverse social fabric. They have friends, they stay in touch with their sister-in-law. Mostly their social fabric for most men is work. And when they lose their social fabric and their purpose, they get inactive, sometimes depressed. And when you get inactive and depressed, your brain kind of sends out a hormone or a message saying, oh, it's time to die. This person isn't adding any value. So staying engaged at work, supposedly for every additional year you work, your life expectancy actually goes up. So I think that the kind of basic nature or notion of work is changing. And a lot of do you imagine yourself retiring?
Yeah, so I was going to chime in on this. No, but I was going to ask you, does it matter if you work in an office? Because my team is all remote. But I cannot imagine myself retiring. My wife's like, can you retire at 50? Well, in theory, yes. But if you're asking me to retire at 50, the answer is absolutely not. Because speaking of hormone that says you're ready to die, thinking about retirement makes that hormone pump through my brain and body. I don't even want to think about retiring. Boredom isn't the right word. I would just feel like a useless sack of carbon, and I don't think that would be good for my sanity at all.
Yeah, everyone has an addiction or needs. My addiction and my need is really pathetic. I have an addiction and a need for the approval or affirmation of strangers. And so,
okay.
And it's totally pathetic, but
at
least,
business.
I know it. So yeah, I'm in media. I like quote unquote thought leadership, and I enjoy catalyzing a conversation, ideas, having people discuss them. I like being recognized on the street. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel affirmed. But the idea of hanging it up right now, I just don't. It doesn't make any sense to me. Now, remote work, I have pretty strong feelings that it's an unbelievable unlock for people like you, and especially someone like me. I travel 180, 220 days a year. I have a remote podcast kit. I'll be in Scotland on Friday, Cap d'Antibes on Monday, Oslo on Wednesday, Munich on Thursday. I won't miss a beat in terms of work, because if you're in the information economy and your work can be distilled down to zeros and ones, I can be anywhere, do podcasts, do my writing. I'm doing a hit. I'm going on Jake Tapper's show on CNN tonight from Marylebone, London. So COVID and the acceptance of remote work or digitization of content has been just an unbelievable unlock for people in my industry. For someone like you, is your podcast studio at home?
Yeah, I'm in my house right now in the studio. Yeah.
Right. So you get to go upstairs, maybe spend some time with your kids when they get home, maybe be a better partner, be a little bit more engaged in home. It's a wonderful thing. Have your own mental health. It's a creative your own mental health. Now, a young person, the office is a feature, not a bug. 1/3 of relationships begin at work. Young men especially need work because they need guardrails. They need more They are less mature than a 22-year-old woman starting work. Their prefrontal cortex doesn't fully mature until it's 25. It's 12 to 18 months behind a woman's. And I remember the only kind of real job I ever had, I worked at Morgan Stanley. It was so important to me because learning how to get up every morning, put on a tie, put on a suit, plan, get to work, learning how to read a room, having a boss who would take me out of a conference room and go, "Don't say that again. That was a stupid thing to say. Don't say that." Or occasionally, not as often, pull me in a room and go, "That was great. Keep doing that." To have the discipline not to get high or drunk every night was really important for me coming out of college. If I had, if I were working for some podcast and I was a producer I'm just shocked that all of my people aren't walking their dogs all day and trying ketamine and then going to the movies in the afternoon. That's what I would be doing if I were 23 and working from home.
Yeah.
And also people don't like to talk about this. 1 in 3 relationships begin at work. So where are young people supposed to meet other people? They're not drinking as much, so they're not going to bars as much. The attendance at religious institutions is way down. They're not going into work. Where on earth do young people meet? So when I coach young people and they talk about jobs, they'll say, "I have one job," and I'm like, "One's remote, one I have to be in the office." I'm like, "Go into the office." That is a fantastic place for socialization, training, finding colleagues, mentors, mates is the office.
One thing I should maybe highlight is you mentioned you learned so much at the office from learning from others. I think I also found out that I just was not suited for success in any sort of
100%.
actual corporate
Yeah,
environment.
100%.
I got my ass handed to me at the law firms that I worked at. It was not good. HR was like in the room a couple of times, like, "Hey, we're giving you a job offer here, but we just want you to know that you made it by the skin of your teeth and we don't really like you." There was a couple of those. There was a couple of those, not maybe that explicit, but it was like, but a lot of the stuff where it was like, well, you work really hard on things that we told you not to work that hard on, and you have this and you have this obsessive trait and you have this thing and this communicate. And I thought, oh, and then when I started my own business, it turned out that a lot of the things that they really didn't like about me were quite desirable traits if you are running your own business.
That's
and
right.
it was I was sort of caught in the middle, right, of as the owner of a quote unquote media company, which is a fancy inflated name for a podcast that I ended up naming after myself. I know you can relate, Professor Galloway, host of the Prof G show. But you really learn a lot about how maybe you are not cut out for one thing and you should try this other thing that no one's telling you about.
Yeah, but you did exactly what you're supposed to be doing in your 20s, and that is you're workshopping different careers to try and find something you're really good at, such that you can establish the currency in the marketplace to find a career where you can make more money than you spend, start deploying an army of capital, and do something that you could become great at and make really good money. And making really good money and having mastery of something makes you passionate about whatever it is. That is what you're supposed to do in your 20s. I took a job at Morgan Stanley because my roommate, uh, a wonderful guy named Gary Lushgold, he desperately wanted to be an investment banker. And I was very competitive with Gary. And I thought, well, if Gary wants it, I'm going to get it. The day I got my offer from Morgan Stanley, I can interview well. I had no idea what investment banking was. I had no idea even what it was. Somehow I managed to talk my way in. And I worked there for 2 years. I was terrible at it. They didn't like me. I didn't like them. And I realized, like you, and it's not a humble brag, I am not a cutout for big companies. And I don't say that because I'm so awesome and I got to do my own thing and they were all idiots. No, I am too insecure to work for a corporation. Every time more than 3 people went into a conference room, I was convinced they were talking about me. I had no idea the night before I got my bonus what I was going to get, and I couldn't sleep. I resented anybody senior to me who I didn't think was as smart as me, and because I knew they were making more money. And you got to realize that's called the corporate world. And people romanticize entrepreneurship. I've stayed in touch with a couple people at Morgan Stanley, not a lot, because see above, I hated them and they hated me. But the person I do stay in touch with that's been at Morgan Stanley for 30 odd years, became a vice chairman. I've been extraordinarily successful by most standards as an entrepreneur. He has taken the route much less much less risky, in some ways much less stressful, probably not as rewarding. My highs have been higher, my lows have been lower. We ended up in a similar place economically, and he got there, I think, with less stress and less risk.
Mm-hmm.
we romanticize startups. When kids come to me during office hours, when I say my kids, my students, they don't want to talk about brand strategy. They want to talk about careers. And it's usually something like this. I have an offer with JP Morgan and Google. Economy's really strong right now. If you're coming out of NYU, average salary is $212,000. The average kid has 3 to 5 offers. Or I'm thinking, but I'd like to start my own business. And you started your own business. And I'm like, don't be a fucking idiot. Go to work for JP Morgan or Google.
Yeah.
Because once you leave the corporate world, it's kind of a one-way door. And two, there is no better way to get rich slowly, but to get rich with near certainty, or at least economically secure, than the greatest wealth generator in history, and that's the U.S. corporation. And it requires certain skills that I don't have. It requires a certain level of patience, a certain level of maturity, a certain appreciation that in a big company to scale, they maybe don't get the nuance right every time. Maybe they make some dumb decisions. There's just certain shit you have to do. Yeah, you have to put on a tie. At least you did at Morgan Stanley. But if you're willing to navigate the politics, be patient, put up with the administrative bullshit, and you can survive 5, 10, 20 years, you generally find you wake up and you have $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million in stock. They have removed all the moles from your body and paid for your partner to have a kid. They train their people. They invest a lot of human capital. So the reality is probably 2/3 plus of entrepreneurs do it because they have no options. The guy who owns the car wash and the dry cleaner didn't get an offer from Google. They're not, HR is not calling them. The majority of entrepreneurs, or a lot of them, are immigrants who don't have access to the corporate world. So we romanticize entrepreneurship, but the two of us did what we're supposed to do in our 20s, and that is, it's very difficult. The way you find what you want to do is you find out what you don't want to do. And it's sort of a process of elimination. I think to believe that you're going to come out of college at 22 and find the right job and the right career right away, wow, that happens, but it's really unusual. And what I say to a lot of 23 and 24-year-olds who I talk to and are quite frankly a little bit depressed, maybe a kid graduates from law school at 25, goes to work as a first-year associate. I can't imagine a worse job. It's an awful job. It's reviewing documents, ton of pressure, boring with a lot of pressure placed on it, just drudgery, right? And they'll say, I don't like it, and I don't think I like the law, or I don't think I like investment banking. I'm like, well, you're kind of where you should be, and that is your first job sucks, but you also have to decide, well, maybe this isn't the right career for you. Now, don't just bail on it because it's hard. That's called work. But you're kind of where you should be. I don't know very many people who in their early 20s think, yeah, I just loved my job. I loved being in PR and fashion and finding out that means stuffing bags full of stupid giveaway Chanel shit and doing a ton of work for no money. It's your 20s is about workshopping to find that thing you're great at.
I think that's a really important thing to highlight. You're right. We romanticize the entrepreneurship. Everybody wants to run a startup. People ask me about this stuff all the time. How do I get into media? I mean, it's back then, this was a scary thing to do. It was, I'm unemployable. Why would you leave your good job that you actually enjoy to do this? And a lot of it's sort of midlife crisis-y. It's like, I've always wanted to start my own company. Go ahead and do it, but don't quit your job to do it, for God's sake. If you want to start selling bracelets on Etsy or something on the weekend, man, you don't have to leave, like you said, Morgan Stanley to make an app. I mean, pay somebody to do that with all the money they're throwing at you and see if it takes off. The go all in strategy is what really bugs me. A lot of these online influencers are like, burn the ships. I don't think you should burn the ships. That ship can take you back to safety if you need to. I think that whole like, oh, having a safe backup plan is why you're not successful. I think that's actually largely bullshit and flat out irresponsible. If by the time you're married and have a kid, I think you keep that ship. It's not just your ship anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and there's some nuance. The first is, you probably should. When I speak to people, a lot of people will say the following: I want to start a company, but first I need to get some experience at a big corporation. I want to accomplish some things. So I'll get some financial security, and then I can start a business. I'm like, you're never starting a business. Unless you know pretty much right away you can't work for a big corporation and you are just have almost no choice. I feel like entrepreneurs are a little bit born, not made. You're probably not going to start a company, because anybody who has common sense and is in any way risk averse never wants to take the leap. 99% of people, this is what it means to be an entrepreneur. when I started L2 in 2009, I had 2 babies at home, and I used to come home and tell my partner, "Oh, I can't be home for bath time. Oh, I can't go to anything on Saturday, and I gotta work half day on Sunday." Huge strain on my relationship, didn't see my kids at all. Oh, in exchange for doing this, I need to write the company a check for $50,000 at the end of the month. That's what we get for me being an entrepreneur. And it's awful. And unless you're willing to do that in the beginning, you're just not. 99% of people aren't willing to sign the front of checks, they're only willing to sign the back of checks. The stat that always blew me away, or the observation, when L2 was about to be acquired, I was always very transparent. We were about 100, 120 people. I said, we're probably going to be acquired in the next year. We've had a bunch of inbound inquiries, companies jamming, market strong. I would bet we'll be acquired in the next 12 months. Everybody in the company, we kind of adopted the tech company thing. Everybody had options. If you exercise your options and buy the stock and hold it for a year, when it's acquired, you pay a much lower tax rate. You pay cap gains. So I would have thought everybody would exercise their options.
Sure.
Now you have to write a check if you own what ultimately might be call it $100,000 in equity. You might have to write a check for 15 or 20 grand. Do you know how many people actually converted their options to equity?
Oh man, how many?
0. The only people who did it were the people who are already wealthy on the board.
Jeez.
People just don't. The idea of writing a check to a company, even though it might pay off down the road, people just aren't willing to do it. So when the company got acquired, they all paid. Then they exercised their options to equity and sold the equity, and they all paid ordinary income. People, to be an entrepreneur, you need a couple things. Incredibly risk aggressive, be willing to sell like crazy, and be a little bit sociopathic, because you're going to have to be able to stand up in front of your team and constantly rally them and be a little bit disassociate from the risk and how shitty things go on a regular basis, especially if you have a family, because sometimes you feel irresponsible. My business, as it happens, when my first son came marching out of my girlfriend, my business was going terribly. And I'm like, oh, I'm not only a failed entrepreneur, I'm failing as a father. That was like
on day one.
Yeah, that really kind of messed with my head.
Oh man.
But there's, I would be very honest about the kind of person you are. I think the sweet spot, so what's instructive here, the sweet spot, I think, for joining a company, if you want a little bit of taste or upside of that entrepreneurship, is that, and by the way, the upside's huge. When I sold my company for $160 million, only 1 in 7 companies survives, small companies. So I started 9, and I had 2 successes. And by the way, that's all you need. And the great thing about American economy is it doesn't embrace failure. That's bullshit, but it'll tolerate it. But all you need is once you have huge potential upside. And what a company does is it kind of guards you, not against all the downside, because you can get a memo or a voicemail saying you've been laid off, but it's just a path that's less risky going forward. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and these people that get written up in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, who started several companies, a bunch of them got close, never made any money, maybe even lost money on the whole, borrowing money from people to start their companies. And it's just devastating. I've had that happen to me. You're more risk aggressive. You have to have almost a disassociative ability to separate yourself from stress. You have to be willing to sign the front of checks, not the back of checks. And you have to show incredible resilience, because the only thing I can guarantee you in life, much less entrepreneurship, is a series of, a decent amount of joy, but also a lot of tragedy and failure. And success in entrepreneurship is your ability to endure rejection, ability to endure failure. And entrepreneurship is really just a synonym for salespeople. I was always selling clients, selling employees to join me, selling investors. I'm just constantly selling all the time. So the core attribute, the core competence of an entrepreneur, whether it's Jeff Bezos or someone starting a podcast, is simple. Storytelling. You've got to be able to explain to them why this is an interesting podcast, why you should advertise, why you should come to work with me, why you are going to benefit here, why you shouldn't go to work for Google and join us. But it's one of those things where I think it's more, actually, it's like kids. I think it's more nature than nurture.
That's interesting. I think a lot of people, they get sold a bill of goods because their commencement speaker said, follow your passion. And they're like, well, I need to start a business then. And I think that follow your passion is bullshit. It's always told by people What's the Scott Galloway quote? The people who told you to follow your passion made their billions in iron smelting. It's like universally the case.
No, what I've said is anyone who tells you to follow your passion is already rich. And the person telling you to follow your passion made his billions in iron ore smelting. Your job is to develop economic security for you and your family by finding something you're great at. And here's the thing. Very few kids grow up thinking they're going to be passionate about tax law. The best tax lawyers enjoy it. They're good at it. They get camaraderie, relevance, a larger selection set of mates than they deserve, and they fly private, which makes them passionate about tax law. So what I can guarantee you is that here's the bad news. The quote unquote passion fields, most of them for most of us are not passions, they're hobbies. I would have liked to have made my living as an athlete. When I got to UCLA, I found out that was never going to happen. Be a DJ on weekends. Maybe you're a good writer, but to be a great writer, you have to be one of the 100 best, or to make a really good living, you have to be probably one of the 100 best authors in the world. To make a really good living in journalism, you have to be great at it for 20 years and then get a book deal. You know, the passion romance industries, modeling, fashion, sports, just the lowest return on investment of any industry. The good news is that getting great at anything, the guy who installs my soapstone here in Marylebone, this Iraqi guy, can tell you everything about soapstone. I talked to him very openly about his business. He's been doing it for about 18 years. He's the soapstone guy for all these people renovating their homes. He does about 3 million pounds a year installing soapstone and everything, and he clears about 1.2 million. He is great at it. He can tell you about the veining and the marble and the quarries. And you just listen to the guy, and it's almost like he's describing rock as if it's poetry. And he's great at it. And the fact that he's great at it, is known for being great at it, and makes that kind of money, makes him passionate. This is what you become passionate about is when you get to our age, or I'll say in your 40s, I'm older than you become really passionate about taking care of your kids. You become really passionate about taking care of your parents and being able to take your spouse to really wonderful places. You become passionate about the absence of stress from your relationships that not having economic security injects into every relationship. And I want to be clear, I don't want to crush anybody's dreams. If you want to be in sports, if you want to be a fashion designer, if you think you could be a world-class DJ, fine, have at it, but set some guardrails. And that is, okay, in order to make a living in this industry, I need to be in the top 3%. What does it mean to be in the top 3% of DJs? It means that I need a record contract and this many downloads on Spotify or whatever. Okay, how long should that take? Well, I should be able to do that in 2 years. Fine, hold yourself to it. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is you go to your 35 and 40 as an actor and you get a few signs of success, and at the age of 40, you're driving an Uber. And just coming to the recognition that the Motion Picture and Television Association, or the SAG-AFTRA union, which has 180,000 actors in it, that 83% of them didn't qualify for health insurance last year because they made less than $23,000. You don't want to be one of those 83% that doesn't have health insurance, even though it was a ton of fun when your friends saw you on Will and Grace, right? The vanity industries are notoriously low ROI.
I think looking back, you mentioned the role of luck earlier. 2020 hindsight, a lot of success for this podcast, for example, is almost an accident, right? I was passionate about something. I wanted to talk on the radio when I was little. When I was in law school, I started a podcast because I was giving talks and people kept asking questions about the previous talk. So I recorded them to CDs. Somebody told me about podcasting. Then I just kept doing it because it was fun. And then somewhere along the line, the market decided podcasts were worth millions of dollars a year. And here we are. But it just could have easily decided that YouTube was the only thing that mattered and podcasts weren't worth anything. And I would have had a fun hobby, and I'd be doing it on the weekends while I do real estate law at whatever firm in New York or not. And it's just, I think it's important to acknowledge that, but it's also important to acknowledge the idea that you can follow your talent. But it sounds like what you're saying is cultivate mastery, and the passion follows from that, or may follow from that.
Well, what I would suggest is, if you want to have economic security, and you have to have a sober conversation, where do you expect to be in terms of your weight class economically? I survey my students at the end of the course. Where do you expect to be economically by the time you're 35? About 80+% of my students expect to be in the top 1% economically in the United States. And that's not even that much. It's like $600,000 or $700,000 a year, I think, which is a lot of money for some people, but that's the top 1%. And given they're making $212,000 on average at 28, I think, yeah, by that time I'll be making that much money. So what I say is, okay, and I don't know anyone other than people who are smart enough to inherit money that get to the top 1% without doing pretty much nothing but working for 10 or 20 years. I'm not saying you can't have fun. I'm not saying you can't find a mate and have kids, but your primary gig of your life is going to be work, and it's going to take priority. We all say, oh, our family takes priority. My family did not take priority on the weekends. My job did. If there was something really important, yeah, I figured it out. But for the most part, my job was priorities 1, 2, and 3 for me because I wanted to establish economic security. So have a sober conversation around the trade-offs. And I would suggest when you're young, that's the time to make that real commitment, because when you get older and you have kids that are a little bit older and you're getting a little bit older, I have a lot of balance now. And the reason I have a lot of balance now is because I had almost none in my 20s and 30s. It cost me my hair. It cost me my first marriage, and it was worth it. And that's a crass thing to say, but my life now is wonderful, but nothing's for free. I grew up with no money. Economic security was hugely important to me. It was my priority. I didn't want to save the whales. I didn't want to be a good person. I didn't want to find my passion. I wanted to make money so I could take care of my mom. And I also figured out early on that guys who had more money and I've noticed in the fraternity at UCLA that if their parents had a place in Palm Springs or Aspen, women seemed to sort of gravitate towards those guys as they were getting to their senior year. And I thought, okay, I want to take care of my mom. And I like the idea of being one of these guys that has a larger selection set of mates. These were very base, kind of crude observations. But I thought there's things I can control. There's things I can't control. And one of the things I can control is how hard I work. And so I kind of went all in. And I want to be clear, my way is not necessarily the right way. It was just my way. A lot of people decide they're not going to live to work. They're going to work to live. But be clear, if you're not planning to work that hard, then you need to, and balance is super important, then move to a low-cost area, make sure you have dual incomes, and just be sober about your cost of living. Because I find there's a mismatch and a misalignment sometimes between partners and people's expectations. If like, oh, I would never leave New York. Okay. If you want to raise kids in New York, how many kids do you want? 2 or 3 kids? Okay. You need to make $1 million a year. Given the weight class you expect to be in and the lifestyle you expect to have, with a 47% tax rate, add it all up, you need to make $1 million a year, which means you have to be outstanding at something. And most young people don't really have what I call a sober conversation around this stuff. And then they get lectured at by people who would literally have sex with their sister for a nickel about, oh, I never thought about money. I just wanted to build something great. Give me a break. I don't know a single entrepreneur or venture capitalist who's not in the back of their mind adding up the dollars and making sure they're going to have some semblance of economic prosperity. So I say get very serious about money very early. And we're all supposed to pretend every man and every woman is supposed to be, we disproportionately evaluate women unfairly based on their looks, and we disproportionately evaluate men unfairly based on their economic success. And women are supposed to be accidentally hot, and men are supposed to be accidentally super ballers. Like, oh, I'm just so talented. I slipped and broke a hip and fell into millions of dollars because I'm just so good at what I do, but I don't think about money. No, think about it. Learn about it. Ask your friends how much money they're making. What are they doing with their investments? How are they planning their taxes? What's their approach to building wealth? There's this taboo around talking about money that I think has largely been fomented by the rich to try and keep the poor down because there's an asymmetry of information. Rich people talk about money all the time, and the people who understand a certain language can speak it much more fluently than the people who don't. Learn about money. I think in every senior class in high school, there should be a class called adulting. What is the interest rate on your mortgage and why is it important? What role do taxes pay? Why are the credit markets different than the equity markets? I'd also like to see a course, part of adulting, on mating. How do you approach someone and express interest while making them feel safe? These are things that most people sort of figure out, but a lot of people don't. And I'm speaking from history here. I always made a lot of money, but I never really saved any, and I didn't diversify. And I ended up 42 with a new kid and broke. And if I'd just been a little smarter or a little less stupid, a little less arrogant, thinking that a baller like me who's running a company that's about to go public, I should borrow money against the stock and double down because that's the mythology of Silicon Valley. Well, no, Scott, if a great financial recession comes down and your company can no longer access credit, and then there's a longshoreman strike and the merchandise gets cut off the Long Beach coast, your company could go Chapter 11 despite how awesome you are, and you could end up being worth negative $3 million about the time you have your first kid. That could happen. And there are a few easy things I could have done to protect myself from that. But I was too arrogant, and I hadn't learned the basics of diversification and financial literacy.
There's a lot about that in the book. For those who are interested in learning about that, The Algebra of Wealth, will obviously link it in the show notes. And when people use our book links, it helps support the show. One huge insight from the book, it's almost a throwaway line, but you just reminded me of it. You should talk to your friends and contacts about money, salaries, what you get paid, what they get paid, the job market. Because I think you said something like only your employer benefits from your ignorance and lack of connection and knowledge in this area. And I thought that was really insightful. People will talk about their sex life with their spouse in front of their buddies. But if someone's like, hey, man, what are you guys making? I'm wondering if I'm not making enough. No one will have that conversation. I mean, you would have to be blind drunk before somebody throws that one out there.
This is the following. It is, again, a myth fomented or a zeitgeist encouraged by the incumbents, basically management and shareholders of companies. For some companies, it's a fireable offense to talk about your salary. Some explicitly say, if you talk about compensation, we can fire you. Why? You can bet the senior people know what everyone's making. But you might find out that Bob down the desk, who's not doing any better, maybe even a worse job for you, is making 30% more because you didn't threaten to leave. And if everyone had perfect symmetry of information, then compensation costs would go up. And the shareholders and the senior managers wouldn't be as profitable and be able to pay themselves enough money. So asymmetry of information benefits the people who have perfect symmetry. Also, young people, especially young men, are worried that they're going to reveal themselves as not being the baller that they're trying to portray.
Right.
I make $84,000 a year. It's tough for me to pay my rent. I still get some money from my parents. I'm really worried about it. My student loans are weighing down on me. It's helpful to talk to other people because what you generally find, it's like when you talk about kids, you find out anyone who has more than 2 or 3 kids, one of the kids is struggling with something, device addiction, ADHD, whatever it is, right? And the moment you kind of break the seal, especially with men, and you start talking, you just get this outpouring. Oh yeah, I'm worried I'm going to get fired at work. I can't, I've been sending money home. I can't afford it any longer. My student loan payments, or my spouse is, not aligned around money, and he or she is disappointed in me that I'm not making more money, and I've been loath to tell her about one of our investments doing really poorly because I think he or she's going to be very disappointed in me. Money creates so much stress in people's lives. The majority of divorces aren't reverse engineered to infidelity or a lack of shared values. They're reverse engineered to stress about money. And you have to have alignment and literacy, fluency, alignment, and be able to talk about it with your friends and be able to say to your friends, if someone says, "Oh, I'm making 150,000," you're like, "I'm making 90. What are you doing?" "Well, I work in CRM at Salesforce." "Wow, what are the skills?" This, and this. "Do you think there's any way you can get me an interview?" Men hate asking their friends for help.
Yeah.
Because you're supposed to be such a baller that you don't need anybody's help. You know what strengthens friendships? Asking people for help. There was a study at Google. When they put out a job opening, they get 200 CVs in 30 minutes. They pick the best 20. And of the 20 people that come in, 80% of the time, the person that's hired has an internal advocate and friend in the company. So how do you be successful? You put yourself in a room of opportunities, even when you're not in the room. Now, a lot of that comes down to being a good person, a generous person. Any opportunity to help someone who's younger or your age or who's struggling is a gift because they will remember it. Is there a job open? If there is a job opening at your firm and you work at a good firm, you should be scouring your head for anyone you know who might be good at and benefit from that job, right? Because that person will be forever grateful, and at some point you might need them to get a job. But one of the reasons I think kids need to get, or young people, it's so important that they're social. I've been advocating, I'm jumping all over the topic. I think kids should drink more. I have Peter Attia and Andrew Huberman on my podcast. They've basically declared war on alcohol.
Yeah.
When I look back on the most important things in my life, the things that have really paid off, they've been my friendships and my romantic partnerships. And almost all of them early on, alcohol was a key component of it. And these guys see drunkenness and bad health in alcohol. What I see among young people is togetherness and bonding. And I'm not suggesting everyone start getting up and day drinking. But I do think more young people need to go out, spend more time together, push their boundaries, maybe drink a little bit if they enjoy it, and develop more bonds and more sense of camaraderie, and occasionally make a series of bad decisions that might pay off.
That's a really funny idea, and I get it. I get it, because we kind of, for a lot of us, especially guys, we need that the sort of two whiskeys to go, here are all the real problems I'm having in my life. Does anybody relate to this? Because before that, you're right, it's all about like, oh yeah, I'm going on vacation here. How did you meet your wife,
Jordan?
What's that?
How did you meet your wife?
On Twitter, which she doesn't
use.
Okay, that's
a little odd.
And I don't use.
Let me ask you another question. The first time you kissed her, were you drunk, or had you or her had alcohol?
No.
Okay, you're unusual. All right.
Bear in mind,
you just dispelled my entire theory.
Not really, because my old job before this was all that dating, stuff. So I had to be able to function without alcohol. She doesn't drink, so that was part of it. It would have been weird if I was the only one drinking on that date. I think that would have been a bit of a red flag.
But think about the entire podcast world now. It's all about optimizing. I'm a huge fan of physical fitness. I've worked out 4 times a week for 40 years.
Wow.
I get it. I'm trying to tone down my alcohol intake because I drink too much, and as you get older, my liver can't process alcohol the way yours can. But I do not regret drinking and some of the drug abuse I did, mostly around THC when I was younger. It was a ton of fun. It made me feel closer to people. Lowered some of my inhibitions. I'm not suggesting it's for everyone. I think people should do an audit of their addictions. Everybody's addicted to something because industrial production, our instincts haven't kept pace with industrial production. Everyone has a certain level of addiction, whether it's online shopping or trans fats, or I said my addiction is the approval or affirmation of strangers, which is really pathetic. But find out what your addictions are. And if you're addicted to alcohol, you got a problem. You got to figure it out. But the vast majority of young people will figure out a way to manage alcohol and pot and their job and their relationships. And I would argue, and this never gets reported, in many relationships, it's a feature, not a bug.
You mean the consumption, the vice that you have?
I think going out and getting a little bit up with friends, or using it as a means to perhaps lubricate a relationship, or giving you the confidence to approach strangers, I think that's a positive.
Yeah, I mean, I can't fully disagree as long as it doesn't get out of hand. I mean, that's I think you just described most people's 20s in the first place, or even their 30s, depending on their status during that time. I think for me, everyone's probably wondering what my addiction is. I don't know if I'm addicted to it per se, but I definitely cover a lot of my other bullshit with work. If I'm being honest, like
you're addicted to work, but why are you addicted to work? Are you addicted to money? Are you addicted to the affirmation? What are you addicted to?
I think I use it as an escape from, I work from home. I work with my spouse. She's great. My kids are here all the time because they're little. And so me being in the office with the door closed is like the only refuge I get. And sometimes on weekends, it's like, do you want to go to this birthday party? It's 95 degrees outside and it's in a park with no shade and they're ordering cheese pizza, which you don't eat. You could bring a salad. It's going to be hot though when you get there. And I'm like, no, I got to read Scott Galloway's book today. I got to read the whole thing. Oh, I thought you finished that. Yeah, maybe I got to read Chase Jarvis's book. There's a book I got to read. I can't go do this thing. And it's just like, it's the only refuge that I got. And it's, I wish it was only when it was a hot birthday party on the weekend, but I probably lean on it a bit too much, if I'm being honest.
How old are your kids?
2.5 and 5.
So you're in with the first one, or I'm sorry, the 2.5-year-old, you're in the stage of what I loosely refer to as awful. So 0 to 3, I think for dads, we pretend to like it. And maybe some guys do. I think it's awful. You're just sitting there trying to keep the thing. It's a science experiment. You're trying to keep alive, keep it away from a body of water.
Yeah.
2.5 or 3 to 5, when they start getting into you and it's fun and you really feel some of that, I don't know, unique bonding with your spouse around raising this thing and seeing it evolve, that gets less awful. And then from 5 to 15 is what I call, you're with your older one entering just the best decade of your life. You're going to look back, take a ton of pictures, because in videos too, because you're going to look back on those pictures and you're like, that was why I'm here. These things evolving, the way they look at you, they're into you, the way they see the world in ways you did, and you recognize you and your parents, and you realize your partner's DNA, the purpose you feel that when you work as hard as you do and it pays off, the things you can provide, the protection you can provide for them. it's just so immensely rewarding, and you're not expecting it. You can't even understand it or feel it or explain it to someone who doesn't have kids. And then they turn 15 and I thought I was going to lose my kids when I was 18. My oldest is about to turn 17 and he's still wonderful, but I'm basically following him around the house trying to find things he would do with me. And he's kind of interested, not really. He's into his own things and his own friends. But that you're about to go into the golden decade that I think for most men who are successful and well balanced, such as you, that is the best decade of your life. And what I would tell people is, especially for someone like you who's recognized a little bit of success, or actually a lot of success, really lean into it. Plan a lot of trips, do trips with each of the kids individually, take a ton of photos, talk about it a lot, and try and imprint it. Because I'm finding I relive that stuff. You know those Apple, I forget what they're called, memories reels?
Yeah, where the iPad shows like, hey, 3 years ago, here's you and your wife in Thailand, whatever.
You and the dogs, or the kids and dogs, and it shows it. At night, I stay up and I'll watch those things for 30 minutes. And it's like, I've already planned out. I'm an atheist. I think at the end of my life, I'm going to look into my kids' eyes and know our relationship's coming to an end. And I'm really not excited about it, but I'm already planned the music I'm going to have, Tom Petty and some 80s, where I want to die, the drugs I want, and I'm just going to have all this media that I recorded during those 10 years, and I'm going to get to live that decade over and over again. But you are going into what I would call, especially the little I know about you, the best 10 years of your life. But the way you cement it is you really want to lean into it, take a ton of pictures every night, talk about that day with your kids, with your partner. And I did about 8. I knew I was doing it. I still wish I'd done more of it. Also, you have 2. I wish I'd had a third. I wish I'd had a girl because I don't know who's going to take care of me. But anyways, enough of that.
Yeah, I got a boy and a girl. So my wife's like, let's just stop. One will take care of you / us, and the other one's going to be your best buddy. And it's true, man. You know, he runs home from school. He's like, where's dad? I want to build Legos. Then I want to go biking. Then I want to go to the park. Then I want to build the marble thing. I don't want to go to bed because dad's not in bed. So I have to go to bed with him, and I think it's fun. I think it's hilarious. Then he wants to watch YouTube videos with me on my phone and watch me study Chinese on Duolingo. I mean, I realize that's fleeting. That's not going to be forever. It's only a handful of years.
It's somewhat linear. 0 to 5, it's too much. It's just too much. It's just a lot. 5 to 15 is the perfect amount, and then 15, it's too little.
Oh man, I'm gonna tear up here in a second, so I got to change the subject. Money means less the more you have of it. I've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but the diminishing marginal returns, the income levels where happiness stops increasing. I've sort of read recently that might be a myth. Money kind of can buy happiness, but you have to use it to focus on relationships. And many rich people that I know, and I'm sure you do too, they really only have valuable things. They got a boat or two, but their kids don't talk to them or they don't care about it. You know, the relationship's not there.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of research around this, and that is the bad news is that money can absolutely buy happiness. Middle income homes are happier than lower income. Upper income homes are happier than middle income. The resting blood pressure of a kid in a low income home is higher than the resting blood pressure of a kid in a middle income home. That's the bad news. Money does buy happiness. The good news is that it tops out. Now, it tops out at a pretty high level because what do you need? You need housing. You need to take nice trips. You need to feel like you could survive an economic hit. But if you live in a city, you're talking about several $100,000s a year. It's a lot of money to get to that point of diminishing returns. But once you get above kind of the level where you could say, for example, just live off the interest or the passive income, which is a pretty good definition of wealth, passive income that's greater than your burn. I think that's what it means to be wealthy. You're not going to get any happier with a bigger number. You've at least with me, I've been on the hamster wheel so long that I'm totally driven to have more and more money, and I haven't been able to stop. But the research shows the returns become negligible above a certain amount, which leads to a couple things. One, I'm a big fan of having uber progressive tax rates, say above $10 million. You make more than $10 million, I don't understand why they wouldn't pay 80% tax rates, because it's not going to provide anyone with any additional happiness except for the person who gets a $8,000 earned income child tax credit who's making $40,000 a year. The difference between 40 and 48 is huge for someone. The difference between making 10 million and 12 million for someone is almost negligible. And it's also impacted my life. when I sold my company in 2017, I was done, at least economically. I could survive just off that money for the rest of my life at a pretty decent lifestyle. And I thought, well, it, I'm going to double down. I'm going to start a private equity fund, got some seed investors because I want to be a billionaire. And I could do that based on my contacts, my age, my domain expertise. And I just thought, I liked the sound of Scott Galloway, billionaire. I just thought that sounded good. And then I thought, okay, I've paid a pretty big price not being around my kids. It's been pretty stressful. It's put stress on my relationships, stress on my health. Why don't I just continue to work, do something I really like, and try and cure this virus that infects a lot of people in America called hoarding? And that is, pick your number. And for some people, that number is 1 million. For some people, that's 10 million. For some people, it's 100 million. But once you hit that number, anything above that, I would suggest you spend it. It's a ton of money to spend money. I spend money like a gangster in the 50s that's just been diagnosed with ass cancer. I do crazy shit with my money, and I absolutely love it. I have a great time. We live in a capitalist society. It is amazing the things you can do with money. And then anything above that, I give away. And I don't do it because I'm a good person. I do it because it makes me feel strong. It makes me feel masculine. It makes me feel like I have higher character as opposed to just bitching about shit all day. If I talk about teen depression enough, I'll give some money away. If I talk about vocational programming enough and how young men need more opportunity, I'll give some money away. And that is just so rewarding because dying with, whatever, tens of millions versus tens of billions, not going to get you anything. And along the way, spending it and giving it away is so much fun. So I just don't understand this virus that infects America. I don't think there's any reason for anyone to be worth more than $1 billion, or I'll call it even 100 million. It adds no value. And at some point, when you have individuals that are that wealthy, it does take money out of the treasury. It takes away opportunity from people. And it also power corrupts. And when you have individuals who can turn off battlefield communications technologies or sway elections or whatever it is, or demand that they get subsidies for their EV, or they're turning off the satellite system in a country, there's too much money, which in a capitalist city translates to power in our economy. So I think a lot about this virus of hoarding. And I decided, I made a concerted effort at 2017 that I was not going to increase my wealth, my net worth anymore. I was either going to spend it or give it away.
Wow.
And I think that's the right decision. I made that decision 7 years ago. And these are high-class problems. The majority of the people will never have this problem. But I think as a general zeitgeist in our society, we want to say, why does anyone need to be worth more than this? And I don't mean to go all Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. I don't like class warfare. But if someone isn't going to be any happier having more than $10 million a year in income, why are we taxing it at a lower rate than someone making $50,000? So I think our tax system needs to reflect what Kahneman called loss aversion theory, and that is the pain of making very little money is so much greater than the incremental joy of making a lot versus, a super a lot. So I've sort of switched minds around. I think a lot about hoarding money, and I think about how we need really aggressive, progressive tax rates above a fairly high number.
Yeah, it's interesting, of course, because you want to vote it in your own interest, but also you realize it's not good for society in a lot of ways, and it's a tough pill for people to swallow. I do find it ironic that a lot of the people who are complaining online about whatever wealth tax for people who earn over $10 million or whatever it is, I look at their profile and I'm like, you're never going to be there. This photo was taken in a room that looks like a bomb hit it. You're 30 years old, single guy, not even really working in like a high level corporate. Like, why are you going to war over this? That's what so sort of always mystified me. What's the term? Like temporarily inconvenienced millionaires. A lot of these people will absolutely go to war over this kind of thing, and they're never going to enjoy those benefits. It's like they're brainwashed. They're in some sort of weird cult. I've never understood it.
Well, one of the kind of superpower of Americans is our optimism. And the downside of that, there are $5 in venture capital available to invest in businesses for every one that's available in Europe, because investors here are more optimistic that two crazy kids in a dorm might come up with the next Google. We're just more optimistic. And that has some wonderful things, wonderful features about our society. We will shoot a rocket into space thinking this might work. The downside is that we believe all of our kids are in the top 1%. And we said, well, no, let's continue to grant tax-free status to Harvard with a $54 billion endowment, who's increased their endowment 40-fold, but has only increased the size of their freshman class 4%. Why do I not mind? Because my kid's in that top 1%. It's kind of the lottery ticket phenomenon. That is, people know the lottery is a bad idea, that it doesn't pay off, but baby, my numbers are going to work. And people don't realistically, I mean, this is what happens when you get, my kid is going to be applying to college next year. And I'm part of this enforcement system of the caste system called higher education, where we artificially suppress admissions rates such that we can raise our tuition faster than inflation, such that we can pay ourselves more as academics and administrators while reducing our accountability, because we've created this scarcity value that's similar to a Chanel bag or an Hermes Birkin bag. And it is total bullshit. It's totally contrary to the basic notion of public service. And that is, if you're Harvard and sitting on $54 billion, and you're only letting in the number of students that would roll through a good Starbucks, you are no longer a public servant and you should have your tax status, your tax-free status revoked. Harvard could admit and build the resources with a fraction of that $54 billion endowment. They could expand their freshman class to 15,000 kids and have no sacrifice in quality. But instead, me and my colleagues stand up and applaud the dean when he or she says we rejected 88% of our applicants. We stand up and think that's a good thing. In my view, that's tantamount to a homeless shelter saying he or she rejected 90% of the people who showed up last night. We have to get past this notion that we're luxury brands. We're not. We're public servants. So there's this exclusionary rejectionist culture that's evolved in the U.S. because all of us think we're going to be in the top 1%. Our kids are remarkable, that my investments will pay off, that no, we need to treat rich people better because I expect to be one. And we're not thinking enough about, what is the purpose of America, the platform that is America? Is it to identify a superclass of freakishly remarkable kids and rich kids and turn them into billionaires? Or is it to give the bottom 90 a shot at being in the top 10%? And I look back to where I was when I was a kid. UCLA had an admissions rate of 76%. I was one of the 24% that didn't get in the first time. I had to appeal, and then I got in. The admissions rate this year, guess what it'll be, Jordan?
I have single digits, something?
9.
Wow.
And you'd think there'd be an uprising. This is a public good.
Yeah.
Look what it did for this guy, this son of a secretary who wasn't that impressive. Look what it's done for him. But instead, it's like, no, I believe one of my kids are those 9%. So I think we've sort of lost the script and slowly but surely moved to this rejectionist LVMH exclusionary bullshit strategy that, in my opinion, is just not what America should be about.
I'm looking up University of Michigan, 18%. Oh, that's so much higher than 9%. It's twice as much. This even says on this, whatever, prepscholar.com, this means the school is extremely selective. So that, I don't know what that says about UCL, extremely selective. And these are public schools. Doesn't that mean you should have like a fighting chance at getting in if you also went to a public school? But instead you have to be, I don't know, the son of a diplomat to get in here. That's insane to me. And it was probably maybe a little higher when I went there, but it should be trending the other direction. It shouldn't be harder to get in.
We can find out. When did you apply?
1998 probably. Let's see.
Michigan acceptance rate 1998. Fall test scores. I don't know. Anyways, I bet the only thing I know is that it was much higher.
Ish.
Okay, it's gone from 55 to 18.
That's
so
crazy.
You had
55 to 18.
You had 3 times the likelihood of getting in. In some, Jordan, I don't know if you were a scholar athlete or something like that.
No.
You probably wouldn't get in now.
No, I wouldn't get in now. I got waitlisted.
Yeah,
even then.
And guess what? It's paid off for everyone. The fact that they were not that exclusive and let in you. It's paid off for everyone because here's the thing. No organization, or much less a university, can predict greatness when a kid was 18. Did you have your shit together at 18?
No, I mean,
didn't.
I had all this sort of like varsity football, exchange student, did all these unique things. And then I got into Michigan law, which is way super selective back then, harder now, I'm sure. And I don't think they regret letting me in there either. So what's the problem?
Well, we need alumni, and I'm trying to do this, and I would hope to enlist you to say, okay, We need to start donating money to put our names on buildings. I donate back to UCLA and Berkeley, and I'm all about I want more kids. I want less impressive kids because there's no such thing as less impressive at 18. There's just different. And sure, continue to let in the freakishly remarkable. But guess what? A lot of good kids don't get their shit together until their 20s, sometimes their 30s, and they can become great. And that's the whole point of government and public education, in my view. And we have totally gone the other way. I find it very discouraging. Not everyone's lost the script. The University of California is trying to expand their freshman seats by one full campus. Michael Crow at ASU wants to educate hundreds of thousands of students. Purdue has not raised tuition in 10 or 15 years. West Virginia Tech. Some schools get it, but there are a lot of universities, especially the most well-known, that have decided they're no longer public servants, but luxury brands.
Scott, I know you hire or have hired a lot of people throughout your career. How often is too often to change jobs? I keep hearing about how millennials change jobs faster, but I assume that trend is even accelerating with Gen Z. Maybe not. But at some point, somebody who has a new job every, 2 years starts to look like somebody who gets trained up and then figures out the reality the job is hard or not fun, and then they just quit and move on to something else. That's not somebody who I want to hire. My own team, been with me for like a decade, some people even longer. So the last thing I want to do is hire somebody who's going to quit after 18 months or 24 months. But on the flip side, changing jobs is one of the best ways to get a pay raise. So how do we balance getting a raise, making more money with changing jobs too frequently and giving the appearance of somebody who just, doesn't stick around?
So the research shows that job switchers, like if you show up with 5 jobs in 5 years, you just smell and it's going to be hard for you to get a job. Either you can't be counted on or you interview well and then people decide you're not very good. But the reality is people who switch jobs every 2, 3, 5 years over the long term tend to make more money because we have this phenomena where we tend to see people through the lens of when they came into the company. So my editor-in-chief, who was a kid named Jason Stavers, I've been working with Jason for 30 years. I have trouble forgetting that Jason is not some 22-year-old out of Yale that I can pay $60,000 to, that he went to law school, that he was a partner at a law firm, that he's incredibly bright, and that he has unbelievable opportunities elsewhere. And we have a tendency to be drawn to the unknown and strangers. This happens a lot on boards. They have a tendency to pick an outside candidate because it's easy to come across as perfect in a series of one-hour interviews. And as a result, we tend to undervalue existing people and want to bring in new players thinking they're going to be the answer to all of our problems. So the way you benefit from that, quite frankly, is to switch jobs every once in a while. What I would suggest is the following, and this is what I've done at NYU I've worked there 22 years. Every 4 to 5 years, I would do a market check. And that is I would return the call from Cornell or Wharton or Columbia. I would go talk to them, get a sense for the comp, and then go up to my dean and say, look, the truth has a nice ring to it. I want to stay here. This is my worth in the marketplace. I need you to match it. And I think so what I would suggest is on a regular basis, do a market check. If you find that the market opportunities are much greater somewhere else, then have an honest conversation with some people you trust and your spouse and your parents, or just people who can inform you, because it's very hard to read the label from inside of the bottle around whether it's time to change. Now, on the flip side, as an employer, what you sort of have to do is forget what you know. What do I mean by that? Imagine that person, one, leaving. They're gone. What would you pay them now that you know they left? 2, imagine they just walked in the door, someone with this skills that's doing this kind of work. What would they be worth you? What would you have to pay them? And then if you're blessed enough to be in a high margin company, a media company, pay them a little bit more. And also try and figure out other means of compensation. So my assumption as a manager growing up was that everyone wanted what I wanted. They wanted to be awesome and rich. So I'd give them equity and say, we're going to sell this company for a lot of money and we're going to be awesome and rich. And what I found out is, sure, economic security is important to people, pay people well, but some people want to be managers. Like if you give someone a direct report at the age of 25, that's like huge for them. Go out, interview people. We want to give you a hire. That's like huge for them. Oh, we got an inquiry from the New York Times. Someone has a big ego like I do. I want you to call them and talk to them on behalf of this study. Oh my God, their name in the New York Times? Hugely important for them, right? This person is from Europe. there's a conference there. Do you want to go there? We're going to send you, we know you have family in Germany. If you can show that you have learned enough about that person and that you have a vested interest in their professional happiness, and you're willing to put some resources and effort into delivering against that unique form of happiness, and quite frankly, there's just no getting around it, pay them well. Loyalty is a function of appreciation, full stop. And my superpower is storytelling. That's how I make my living. But my core competence is I've been able to find and retain really talented people. I churn through a lot of people come in and wash out 1 year, 2 years, fine. We're generous with them. We let them go. Anyone who survives longer than that, I create long-term incentive plans. I mutualize almost everything I do. I sign a long-term podcasting contract for whatever, 10 million bucks. I tell everyone, if you're here in 1, 2, 4 years, you're going to get 4% of this. Because if I'm successful, I'm always going to make more money than you. I'm the star here, let's be honest. But if I do really well, so are you. And this is exactly what I mean by that. And I am very talented and going to do super well, which means you're going to do really well. I want you to be economically secure. I want you to make money for you and your family. And if you're in a position, there's nothing like surprising people to the upside, which is difficult to do in compensation because people, generally speaking, especially good people, have an inflated sense of their worth. But my job growing up in the professional world was, how do I pay people slightly less than what they're worth so I can extract as much profits as possible, then sell the company, and then they participate in the equity. And now that I'm a little bit older and I have the luxury of a company that's very profitable, our business is the definition of income inequality. The top 200 podcasts make 90% of the revenue. But if you're fortunate enough to be in those top 200, you can pay people really well. I have flipped the script. Now my objective, and I think most of my employees would agree with this, maybe not, is to overcompensate them. Is to say, okay, this is market. I'm going to pay you what I think is about 1.3 market. And the nice thing about that is that if no one is ever leaving, it means you're paying them too much, but that's fine. But the cost to find new people and train them up, especially in a small company, is really difficult. I think the key to a small company becoming a medium-sized company is you identify the stars. People like to think, oh, everybody's great. No, they're not. I'm convinced 10% of your people create 120% of the value, and the other 90% subtract 20%. Those people who are really good, you want to bolt them to the ground. I think you are outstanding. And also try to ignore age. Occasionally, you'll find a 24 or 25-year-old who is outstanding. And the temptation is to think, oh, they're young, we'll pay them well. But you don't pay them what they're really the value they're adding because they're young. You take that person aside and say, you're a star. You know it. I know it. Or I wouldn't even say this is management philosophy. It's my philosophy. I'm going to give you 3% of this company. These are the revenues I plan for the next 5 years of the company. This is why I'm going to sell it for between 40 and 60 million, which means you owning 4% means at the age of 28, you're going to get $2.4 million. I am that definitive. And I say it might be less, it might be more, but I am committed to making you much wealthier, much more successful than your parents were at that age. And I find that is really powerful because if you find the core of excellence in a company, and you don't worry about them ever leaving or walking in and saying, oh, I got a job at Google or whatever, it makes growing a business much stronger. Compensation, I find, is the hardest part of a business. I serve on a lot of boards. We have meetings, consultants trying to figure out how to compensate the CEO who's already making 400 times what the average employee is making. It is the most difficult part, and it's probably the most important part, is does this person feel appreciated? And the final thing I would say in terms of compensation, I try and have a ridiculously social work environment. What do I mean by that? I am not a social person. I am paid to be an extrovert. The last thing I want to do is hang out with my employees. But I have a deal with them. We're mostly remote. What's interesting is the young people actually got their own office. If there's any 4 of them together at any time, whether it's going to the US Open, going to Tulum, going out to dinner, they have my credit card.
Wow.
Just as long as there's 4 of them there, they can do whatever they want, and it's my credit card. Because the number one source of retention at a company, and I would have never guessed this, is not compensation. It's not the values of the company. It's not the benefits. It's whether that person has a friend at work. People love coming to work when they have a friend or friends there. It makes them happy. So you want to create an environment where people can establish friendships and relationships. When we interview people, we let everyone interview them such that they think this is the kind of person I would like to hang out with. I don't know how scalable that is. I've always built small companies. I haven't built big ones. Maybe you can't do that with 18,000 people. But my kids, when I say my kids, the people, the 15, 16 people who work with me, they like each other, and I think they get a ton of psychic income from coming to a place where they have a good time together and generally feel they're surrounded. They don't have to be best friends, but they genuinely enjoy each other's company.
This is really interesting. I'm tempted to give out my credit card for that reason, but also Jace and Ian and everybody listening, don't count those chickens just yet. I gotta let that one marinate for a bit. Maybe anything over a couple grand, I also have to be there just so they don't go too hog wild without me. Plus, I don't want to miss out.
That's the key, though.
FOMO.
You can't be there, so they go hog wild.
Damn.
You leave. You
That's
leave
true.
at 10 p.m. or you don't go on the trip to Tulum. That way they have a much better time.
They're
not self-conscious.
Right. That's the sad truth. Yeah, look, we're skipping over a lot of the stuff that's in the book about stocks, investments, a lot of sort of introductory principles that I think are super important. I did find it interesting that you recommend people who are awarded stock or stock options at work sell that stock as soon as possible in the most tax-advantaged way possible, because a lot of people, I'm in Silicon Valley, right? A lot of people I know in tech, for example, they will sit on that stock for years and years and years. There's guys that have millions of dollars in Apple stock. I'm curious why you recommend selling it. I'd love to hear this, because I think people, their instinct is to just sit on that stock for as long as possible.
So I'll go to the equation. There is an algebra of wealth. The first is focus. Find your talent. Find something you're good at. They can become great at it in an industry with a 90+% employment rate, which will create the currency to make good money. Stoicism. Realize people aren't thinking about your shit as much as you are. Try and get more enjoyment. Control your emotions. Do the things invest in things you can control, realizing most things are out of your control. One of the things you can control is how much you can spend. Don't be that idiot that buys a bottle of vodka for $400 at 1 a.m. in the club. Try and reduce dumb expenditures. Really track your spending. Try and find high-quality basics that you use over and over. If you have a partner and you're saving, gamify it. I spent $78 a week for 12 weeks my sophomore to junior summer at UCLA so I could save enough money to go back. I got 4 other guys in fraternity, and we gamified. We lived off of bananas, milk, and top ramen. Develop a savings muscle. Recognize one of the flaws in our species is time. Time will go much faster than you think. Your weapon when you're in your 20s is time. You're going to be our age before you know it. Realize that if you put $1,000 away now at 22, you're going to have 30,000 when you're our age, and it'll go really fast. So if someone had a magic box where you could put $1,000 in and get a 30 back in what feels like an instant, how much would you put in? Well, that's called compound interest in time. And then finally, what you were speaking to, diversification. This is where I really myself, Jordan, and that is, I thought if I threw myself at any one company, because I'd had enough signals of success, this thing would be so huge that I should be all in. And my investors were always telling me to be all in on something, show commitment. And, you believe, oh, we're about to go public, and your investors want you to be kind of in it to win it. And there's all this mythology in the press about Mark Zuckerberg pushing back the napkin to Steve Ballmer and going all in, and Steve Ballmer borrowing against his Microsoft stock to buy more Microsoft stock. And it always ends well. Not always. Diversification is risk-free return. You may not have the choice to diversify when you're younger. You have to save a lot of money and put everything into a first house. You're starting a business, you have to put it all on the line in a business. I get that. The moment you have some assets and you have the ability to take some off the table, for God's sake, start diversifying. I could have easily taken $10 million off of the table at red envelope. Instead, I just levered up and ended up negative $3 million when I went Chapter 11 in 2008 during the Great Financial Recession. I would have been set, or mostly set, for life. I don't invest. Last week, it's actually last month, I found out the one investment I was most excited about that I made 2 or 3 years ago, healthcare, preventive healthcare via text messaging, selling into the enterprise, baller CEO, tier 1 VCs, elbowed my win. I put in $5 million, a lot of money for me. Last week, they shut down.
Oh, man.
0. But here's the thing. I don't invest more than 3 or 4% of my net worth in any one thing, no matter how lucrative or amazing it sounds. Because I took a bullet to the chest, but diversification is my Kevlar. So it knocked me off my feet. I was bummed out for about an hour, and then I got right back up. Whereas when I was younger, I didn't have that bulletproof. I didn't have that Kevlar. I went all in on shit. So when I took a bullet to the chest, and keep in mind, no matter how much of a baller you are, the market is bigger than any individual. You can take a bullet to the chest from a random sniper called the market or bad fortune. And if you aren't diversified, that shit can kill you. It almost killed me. I almost wasn't able to get up. I was so devastated emotionally, much less economically, I almost got sort of stuck. So what they don't teach you is the smart thing to do is the moment you have assets, start diversifying. And here's the thing, you don't need to be a hero. You don't need to find the needle in the haystack. You can buy the whole haystack. The market has returned 9% since the beginning of the market. 9%, that's nothing, Scott. That means every 8 years it's doubling, meaning in 24 years, which will go by really fast if you're 22, your investments are going to go up eightfold. Figure out what you're good at. Find a way to save more than you spend or spend less than you make, such you can save money and deploy an army of capital at night. Realize how fast time is going to go and diversify. It all adds up to kind of one thing. I absolutely understand how to get you rich. That's the good news. The bad news is the answer is slowly. And it might seem slow now, but looking back, it'll seem as if it happened really quickly. I got lucky later in life, which saved my ass. But if I had just put 5% of my income aside every year from the age of 22, I've always made a lot of money. I would have had somewhere between 80 and 90 million by the time I was 44 and broke again. Don't be an idiot like I was. Don't be an idiot. Follow these simple equations and you're going to be fine. Assume you are not going to go double platinum or sell a company or have a top 10 podcast. You don't need to. Find something you're good at, make some money, save some money, understand how fast time is going to go, and diversify.
One last thing, because I know we're running out of time. One last thing that has nothing to do with money. I know you train your sons in communication. I just heard it sort of as an offhand comment. I'd love to know how you do that. And of course, why, even though it should be self-explanatory, but how and why you train your sons at communication. I think most of our dads were not good at this. Maybe they didn't. I don't think it's that they didn't want to. I think it's not where a lot of men's talents lay. Also, it might be generational. So it's a good idea maybe to break that if we can figure out how to break that.
Yeah, I don't know. I try. I'm not sure I'm very good at it. The first thing is I try to encourage my kids, and I used to do this test. I no longer do it because it started putting a strain on our relationship, that every time we left the house, they had to speak to a stranger. I think the key to professional and personal success is your willingness to endure rejection. And if you want to score above your weight class professionally or romantically, you have to develop the ability to endure rejection. And to even present yourself with the ability to endure rejection, you have to approach strangers. Hi, my name is Jordan. I just left law school or my legal firm. I'd like to speak to you about a job in this, that you're subjecting yourself to rejection. It's passive rejection online. You approach a strange woman at a bar. Hey, where are you guys from? I met my wife at the Raleigh Hotel. It was the middle of the day. It was sunny out. She was sitting with another woman and another man. And without the benefit of alcohol, I approached her, which was very difficult for me. And I teach my sons to approach people, or I said, I need you to talk to someone, a stranger, or I'm not letting you back in the house. Easy for my oldest son, not easy for my youngest. But I think it's important that people have the ability to talk in front of the person, talk to the person in front of you and in back of you in the line at Starbucks. Get used to opening. That's the beginning. Get used to opening. Then find a medium for practice. Establish what your medium is. TikTok, texting, Medium, Twitter, Threads, PowerPoint. Figure out a medium for storytelling that you can become a Maya Angelou, where you can become fantastic at it and double down on it and commit to becoming a great storyteller in one of those mediums. And then a lot of it is just what I'd call practice. And then what I do with my boys is I'll hear something on the radio. We just talked about diversification. I'll say to them, Nolan, what do you think we mean by diversification? And I'll just ask them questions and try and get them to explain concepts. And then really, and it's hard to get your sons to do this, but I think if you want to be a truly great storyteller, the basics, like if you want to be a great athlete, you have to have a certain level of fitness. I think the basics of fitness around storytelling probably begin with writing. I think it's difficult to be a great orator, great at any type of storytelling unless you can write fairly well. And so I would suggest that everyone who wants to be a great storyteller has the ability to organize their thoughts in the written form. But if there's any one thing I could bestow upon my kids that I think will stand the test of time, it's not Mandarin or information system. That's just bullshit. It's storytelling. If you think, I don't care who you are, what industry, anyone who's super successful has the ability to hold a room or hold a chat group or get a bunch of, applause on Medium. They can craft an arc storytelling, and they understand how to kind of massage and manipulate and kind of illuminate that medium, if you will. It's all about, in my view, it's storytelling.
We are out of time. And look, what I love about the book, The Algebra of Wealth, again, linked in the show notes, is for all the practical tips in the book, and there are a ton. There's a ton of like real rubber meets the road instruction here. You keep coming back to the idea that I love to harp about myself here on this show, which is that money is essentially a means to freedom and time and energy and resources that you can then invest in your relationships, because that's the real end game. And I think it's really easy to lose that idea, lose the plot. I think it happens to people who don't have money as much as it happens to people who have plenty of money. I don't think anybody hits a level of wealth where they're immune to that particular trap. So thank you, Scott Galloway, once again for coming on the show. I always love our conversations. And sorry I kept you 1 minute longer than I promised I would.
Jordan, it's always great to see you. Congratulations on your success. I see you just killing it. And I know you well enough to know you're a good person with a young family, and I really do get reward from how well you're doing. Congratulations on everything.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube only has about a quarter of the episodes that we release here on the Jordan Harbinger Show audio feed. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you'll find access to all of our shows that don't appear on YouTube, such as Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, and even lawns to find out if they're backed by science and or logic. Also, our Feedback Friday episodes, where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, and some of that stuff is dicey. Every episode of the Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful that you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.